What's up, everyone? Welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. So we're going to be looking at Gotham Knights and some of the combat systems that we got to see from a lot of these previews, because I strongly believe that a lot of the previewers have kind of skipped on something that's very important. Now, some of them did touch on it, and that is the comparison of Gotham Knights combat to, say, a specific video game or style of video games. So one thing that I've always mentioned on this channel is that one of the biggest selling points for Gotham Knights will be its combat. And the developers making a game in the Batman universe was going to provide a very huge conundrum for people to judge, because the Batman games already had created a combat set of mechanics that was already, in quote, what we thought was the standard. Now, if they had possibly made another DC superhero that had his own melee combat and used this design, it would have been very easy for people to kind of divorce those two comparisons. And I saw a comment on this channel saying, you're only covering the positives, there are pros and cons and blah, blah, blah. And I said, out of 350 videos, you think I've not mentioned my cons of Gotham Knights that I've made? So if that's probably anybody's stance, you might want to go back into the library and see maybe up to 2 years ago, where I've discussed pretty much extensively things that I felt was going to cause this game to have some challenges. But I haven't even played the game yet, so how am I going to even be giving any more cons at this point? Because in everything, you got to get that gameplay feel. But I am looking at the visuals, I'm looking at the way the systems are interacting, and just from the top of my head, I can think of one game that I've mentioned in the past that you can compare its own mechanics to Gotham Knights. And that is actually Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Maybe you can say Origins, maybe you can say Valhalla. I haven't played those two, but Odyssey, I beat that game, so it is extensively the combat system that I see possibly being implemented here in Gotham Knights. In fact, it's so close that I can't even scratch my head to, wrap my mind around it to see how much this is actually very, very similar to the combat mechanic system in that particular game. And I think this is where a lot of the previewers kind of have, in a sense, missed the mark, because many of them are coming with the Arkham framework into Gotham Knights. I understand. I get it. I'm a huge Arkham fan. There's no way that I'm not going to also look at that. But thankfully, I got to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And in looking at the way that combat flowed, I think this is what we have here in Gotham Knights. Now, this design decision, whatever it was born out of, we have to also go back and take a very quick look at. Now, one thing a lot of people were saying when they first saw Gotham Knights was it just gave them the Ubisoft vibes. For the most part, I had said the first initial trailer gave me Assassin's Creed vibes. Just look at the way the enemy levels are on their, right there on top of their head. That UI display, it already was just showing me like, yo, why do we have levels on our enemy? Why do we have these help bars? But this is a system that we've seen in many video games, but Assassin's Creed really does accentuate it very well. You can turn them off, but for playing and fighting against bosses or heavy enemy NPCs or even street thugs, you want to be able to assess how your damage is going sometimes, so maybe you leave it on and play with it for the rest of your game. So you're already seeing from the visual perspective, there's a very stark comparison that you can even do almost on a one-to-one basis to see how similar these two are. In fact, the emblem of your enemy NPC levels are even similar to Assassin's Creed. And so I'm wondering, why did most of the previewers not see this? I know, and I remember some previewers actually mentioned this, so I want to give credit to them because they got to see this system mirror, or at least in a chimeric form, look like one another. And so the combat, the combos, the abilities, the special effects, the damage types, basically damage over time, AoE damage, all of that stuff are things that you can see in most RPG games. And that's where I think the comparison is going to lie. So what are the origins, in my opinion, of this combat design? I remember there's been talk about most of the developers that currently work at Warner Bros. Montreal coming from the neighboring Ubisoft studios. Years ago, Osama Dorias, who worked at Warner Bros. Montreal at that time, who has now moved on to other, things, did mention in a podcast, I think it was the podcast where he revealed that Warner Bros. Montreal was working on 2 DC superhero games. He said one thing about the Montreal area and studios in terms of development firms is people move around all the time. Developers move to different studios like, it's insane, the traction that, all of these moves cause. And Ubisoft in the area in Montreal and even the greater Canadian area has a lot of other studios. So I'm not going to be surprised if a lot of the developers that went to Montreal actually came from Ubisoft, because Patrick Redding himself, the creative director, came from Ubisoft, and he had worked on Splinter Cell, and also was able to, I don't know if he brought Jeff Eleanor or Jeff Eleanor just happened to come to the studio at that time. So your creative director and your game director, both of them are from the Ubisoft pipeline. So I can see how that opens and facilitates the door for them to be able to get a lot of Ubisoft talent that understand those game design and game development processes, for us to be able to have a game that kind of looks like, and from what I think, would play like in combat anyways, the Assassin's Creed games. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not necessarily a bad thing. For those of you who enjoy that kind of combat, or for like you, one of my audience members who said you've never played the Arkham games before, so Gotham Knights is going to be fresh to you, I almost envy you, because that's probably going to give you the very best perspective and representation, and you'll be able to judge this game in a more neutral stance. In fact, I wish you would write me a review of the game so I can just read it out to everyone, and so people can just see the game through your eyes as to how you interact with it, because a lot of the previewers and a lot of reviewers are almost all going to be marred by the Arkham games. In fact, some of them, even if they had never played the Arkham games, when they probably got the invitation to go to Montreal, would have actually picked up the Arkham games to play, and that would have also, like, in a sense, contaminated in a good way. It's not like the Arkham games are bad, but it would have contaminated their ideas and possibly put them in a place where, they're talking about this Gotham Knights game from the Arkham perspective. So I think the origins and I think the makeup of the design and development team surrounding the combat is going to be a factor that maybe not a lot of people will talk about or see. This is not saying that, the combat is already good or bad. I'm just saying, whenever I want to now do my combat analysis of this game, do not be surprised when I'm actually doing so in comparison with games like Assassin's Creed, Odyssey, or maybe even putting in or talking about a few elements from other games like God of War. These games are, or maybe Jedi Fallen Order. These games are games which have a combat system that don't flow freely because the enemy design, the way the world works, the spacing and all that doesn't really allow for you to be able to connect all of your moves and attacks like the Arkham games have helped us to do, because that's the way Free Flow was designed, that even if you're standing on one end of the room and there's one last guy that's left, or maybe there are 5 guys left on the other side, you can basically chain your attack and hit that guy. That was the Free Flow thing. It's a rhythmic combat. Stephen Hill himself said that they designed it to have a rhythm and a flow and almost a musical element to it. So Free Flow, actually, you can play music to it if you actually know what you're doing, because, and some people don't really know. Look at maybe Catwoman's takedown and Harley Quinn's takedown. When you do a blade dodge, it literally almost follows a song. It's insane. It's like a beat.
For me,
and some of the moves in the Arkham games, they literally jam out. You could jam out to it. But, this is something where people like me who just played that game over and over again, we start to do crazy stuff like that. And, I guess you'll probably say I'm crazy, but this is probably where we're going to be looking at things from the combat element of Gotham Knights. So I really appreciate all of you that are kind of tuning in and dialing in to the combat systems. I'd say if you're going to warm up for Gotham Knights or whatever it is, your best bet is probably to pick up an Assassin's Creed game right now and see the way that combat flows. In fact, Assassin's Creed Odyssey is a little slower than Gotham Knights in terms of its animation speeds and the way things flow. So that could also be another deterrent. But again, Assassin's Creed did have you as the, Mystios wield different weapon possibilities. So animations do and did in that game vary based on what kinds of weapons you were wielding. So I see, maybe say Red Hood, because he's a brute, the way he moves. Some of the previewers said he moves kind of slow, but he hits really hard. It's just like, say maybe you're playing with Alexios, I think that's his name, or something like that, and you're using that heavy Poseidon trident or a heavy weapon. All your animations are slow. All your animations and your hits, they kind of like feel like they're weighty, but when you hit the enemy actually feels it. I remember using that trident to spam all kinds of, heavy attacks just so I could push enemies down from ledges and just one tap them. And that's what I did. But then when you use something like a dual blade and you're wielding 2 swords, your animations are faster. And so we're going to see, characters like Batgirl, who's going to wield her weapon faster. Robin, he wields fast. And Nightwing, the 3 of them, they move very fast. But then Red Hood, he's like the one that's probably a heavy weapon wielder. man, this game is so different. You just have to look. If you don't look at it that way, you're going to be bitter. And I think a lot of the folk that are bitter about Gotham Knights, they're already jaded that, oh, this is not Arkham, but they're missing that there is a different dimension that this game is going to slot into. And whether or not they are bitter or not bitter, or they accept it, game is already coming out the way that it is. So you got a few options there. You can look at it and say, well, it's not for me. I didn't play the Assassin's Creed games, or one of these things that I see here are not my cup of tea, and that's perfectly fine. Many of you here, you're looking forward to Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. You're looking forward to possibly other games like Wonder Woman. I am too. I love to see what Monolith does. My goodness, Monolith needs to bring that Middle-earth combat and give it to Diana. Give her a shield and give her a lasso of truth on top of that with a bunch of RPG elements. I'm down with that. That to me speaks a lot of that character. But in this case, I have to kind of, like I said, just tell my Arkham brain, all right, do this, look at it this way. It's not easy, but it's what actually allows for you to be as objective as you possibly can when you're making judgments around this game. Talk to me in the comment section. I appreciate you guys' time and audience. Thank you very much for all of the support. You guys are really representing. Those of you who have your notifications turned on, I really appreciate you guys for hopping into the video as early as you can every single time. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much, and we'll talk soon. Peace out.